Like there are so many choices before each and every one of us, and it's really nothing new. In the book of Joshua, the 24th chapter and verse 15, Joshua was seeking to prepare the Lord's people, and he told them to serve God, but he says, if that seems bad, evil to you, he says, choose this day whom you will serve. And the choices were all in the world, but then he said, as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. And the choices were there. People made choices, then they faced other struggles, and they backed away from them. You get to the New Testament, and you think, well, things are going to be different, but really they're not. In the book of Matthew, the 7th chapter, verse 13 and 14, the Lord warned people there in the Sermon on the Mount that there are two ways. There's a broad way that leads to destruction. There's a narrow way that leads to that heavenly home, to salvation. And again, so many times we can say we're going to do this, and then the challenges get there, and it seems so very hard. And whenever we make the choices, it causes so much of an uproar in our lives. And the Lord knew that in Luke the 6th chapter, in verse 26. He says, woe unto you when all men speak well of you. You see, living the way of God brings challenges in so many realms, but even those around you, they can begin to ridicule you, speak evil of you. And so it just becomes such a struggle. And, I wish I could tell you that, as a Christian, it gets easier and easier, but really it doesn't. It does in one regard because you know of certain tools you can use. But the hurt is there, the struggle is there, the discouragement is always there. And you look and you think, well, how is it that I'm going to overcome this? Well, God promised in 1 Corinthians the 10th chapter and verse 13 that there's no temptation that has taken us, but such is common to man. In other words, other people face it just like you and I. But then he says that God is faithful. He will not suffer you to be tempted above that you're able to bear, but will with the temptation provide a way of escape that you can bear it. And so what I need to do is find a door of escape. I noticed on a commercial the other day, there's someplace in Kansas City, and I think it's just called Escape. And you pay for them to lock you in someplace, and you got to figure out how to get out. I want to be on the money receiving end of that. But they get in there and it's just a puzzle. I think the record was like 45 minutes that somebody got out earliest, and I don't know how many hours before they just come in and get you out and say, you're done. But sometimes life kind of seems like that because we're looking for the door, and it seems like, where is it? How am I going to get this way of escape? Well, if you think about Jesus Christ, I didn't ask Ethan to lead that song, but it was an excellent song that goes with this lesson. That Jesus knows all about your troubles. He will guide you. And so you look at that and you realize that as he does that, he's faced it too. You think about as he ended his ministry, everything was leading up to it. He knew that he had to do certain things, that all this could be fulfilled, and he ultimately went to the cross. I've studied about that. I wept about it. I prayed about it. It's just such an amazing thing to read about what our Lord went through. And you think, how is it that he was able to accomplish that? You realize, as he said in the garden, he could have called 12 legions of angels at any time. Just put a stop to it. But he didn't. Whenever he went, he did so, and he knew not only that the price had to be paid, but I believe that he knew, I think part of it was encompassed in the fact in verse 21 of 1 Peter 2, that he suffered and died for us, leaving us an example. And so how do you face this? Well, one of the things, you look to Jesus. And whenever I think about him, I think about, you can have a safe words. I'm going to use an escape clause. Well, Jesus in essence had an escape clause that he spoke. And it was the way of him showing us how we too can bear things and how we face them and how we just make this decision. I'm going to overcome. I'm not going to be overcome myself. I'm going to be the overcomer. And it's the nevertheless. Whenever you read in Matthew the 26th chapter in verse 39, he went a little further, he fell on his face, and he prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if there be possible, let this cup pass from me." He knew the agony before him. He knew what he had already suffered. He knew the horrors of the cross, and he said, if there is any way, let this cup pass from me. But the very next word, nevertheless. Nevertheless, not as I will, but thou wilt. The same thing repeated in Mark's account in chapter 14 and verse 36, and Luke 22 and verse 42, as he knew what was before him. But he said, nevertheless, not my will. We need to understand that as we go through life, we're going to face struggles, we're going to face hardship, we're going to face trials, we're going to face decisions that just, you look at them and you think, I don't know if I can do that. And that's the time that we step back, just as Jesus did. We step back and we look, and we realize how hard it is. We realize the struggles that are not only in that decision itself, but what's going to come after the decision. But you just take a breath. You say, nevertheless, not my will, but thine. Because it's going to be my will that says, well, I'm going to avoid this. I'm going to do this instead. I'm not going to suffer this ridicule. I'm not going to... But then you come back and you think about Jesus and you say, nevertheless, not my will, but thine. And maybe that'll prompt us to think about our conversion itself. We were talking tonight in the adult class upstairs about infant baptism and how it's not in the Bible. And one of the prominent things is to be baptized, you have to be taught. You have to hear certain things and make a commitment to it. I believe Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And you're ready then to continue steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine. And you think back to when you became a child of God and you think, that's me. So now what I'm doing is I'm deciding to live up to a decision I made. I chose to follow God. And I'm not going to give up on that. Nevertheless, in every decision, whenever the choices are there, the discouragements, the trials, nevertheless, it's not going to be my will, but it's going to be the will of my Father in heaven. Galatians, the 2nd chapter, verse 20, the Apostle Paul, whenever he recounted his conversion there, he said, I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. In the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. You see, I'm going to follow him. Jesus knows all about my struggles, but he's going to guide me all the way through. If I choose to believe him, he's there. He's the one who showed us, nevertheless, not my will but thine. So in the coming days, you look and you think about the choices you make. Maybe there are choices you're dealing with right now. Use the nevertheless clause. Jesus did. Nevertheless, not my will but thine. And then you determine to stay with it. And God, he's promised that you can. So I hope the week's easier. I hope it's such that we can realize I'm never alone. The guide has given me the way. He's given me the example. He's given me the word. He's given me the promise of what's before me. All of these things are there. So nevertheless, I'm going to make the right decision. I'm going to do it tonight. I'm going to do it tomorrow. I'm going to do it the next day. Because God's enabled me to make that decision, and I'm going to stick with my decision on that. Tonight, if you're not a child of God, you realize you never made that commitment that Paul spoke of. You've never been crucified with Christ. The apostle himself wrote in Romans the 6th chapter, speaking of baptism, that's whenever you are crucified, you put the old man of sin to death, and you rise to walk in the newness of life. And he marveled that those people wouldn't stay with it because of the strength of that commitment. So tonight, if you need to make that commitment, let's do so. If you need to go back and revisit that, if you can do it on your own, that's great. If you need help, we're here to help you. But let's do what's necessary that we can go on and do his will in the days to come as we stand and sing the song of invitation. There's a fountain